So we're dealing with a mitzvah that belongs to last week's parsha, but it is one of the most important mitzvahs and one of the only mitzvahs in which Chazal say, Shkula keneged kol haTorah kulo, v'Avrom Avinu lo nikro sholem ad shemal. Milah bizmano and Milah shaloi bizmano. And our focus today is on Milah shaloi bizmano. Many years ago, I think it was more than 30 years ago, I was asked the question, halacha l'maisa. And that's our discussion today. Person had twins. The Bechor, baby number one, was born ben hashmoshes. His younger brother was a bit lazier, and it took him a few minutes. L'tzeis la'avir ha'olam, and he was born after tzeis ha'terchavim. When a child is born ben hashmoshes, we always do Milah on day number 2. And that is for a very simple reason. If you do Milah before Yoim you're mevatel mitzvah saseh, and you have no mitzvah. And therefore, when a child is born ben hashmoshes, the Bris will always be performed on day number 2. And the question was, which of the 2 children is first to have the Milah? I do not recall anybody discussing this question. And I wrote a lengthy tshuva, which most of it is printed in Minchas Osher. So let's go directly to the point. I think source number 1 on our sheet is a Pischei Tshuva in Yordei Siman Reish Samach Hei. And the Pischei Tshuva quotes 2 tshuvas of great achronim, Yad Eliyahu, and I think it quotes the Bris of Rome as well, but I'm not sure. So the Yad of Rome and the Bris of Rome and the Yad Eliyahu both deal, at the first line, he quotes the Bris of Rome and the Yad Eliyahu, and both were great achronim. And they deal with the question, 2 children arrived in shul at the same time. The children are there, the moyalim are there, the sandakim are there, and one baby was born a day or more before the other, and they say, first to be born, first to have a bris. Where do we find this halacha? No early source dealing with Milah. Rather, kvuras hameis. Siman Shin Nun Daled in Yoredeya. I'm not sure it's in our package. But Shin Nun Daled is a very short sif, a very short siman. It has only one sif. And the sif says, if 2 mason are to be buried in the same day, first to die, first to be buried. And there's a story of Reb Chaim Brisker, which I told many times. And the story is essentially about Darkei Hapsak. And it's an important story, and that is why I usually tell this story when I'm teaching Rabbonim in Moira Heroes about Klalei Psika. So as the story goes, a person came to Reb Chaim Brisker and wants to call the Chevra Kedisha to a din Torah. What happened? He tells Reb Chaim, my father passed away very early in the morning. And another member of the community passed away some time later. And for some reason, the Chevra Kedisha took care of Nifter number 2 before they took care of my father. And I want to call them to the Torah. Reb Chaim was shocked. And he said, well, they did something which is very wrong. Took out the Rambam Hilchas Oval. He's ma'ayin in the Rambam in a few moments. Closes the Rambam and he says, they did something very wrong, but you don't have any taina. Person didn't understand this strange response. If they were wrong, then I'm right. If they were wrong, why don't I have a taina? He goes home, he opens the Rambam, and he looked at the exact place where Reb Chaim looked in the Rambam, and he opens the same Rambam, and he sees nothing. He comes back to Reb Chaim, and he says, Yelamdeinu Rabbeinu, I saw nothing in the Rambam And what a strange comment. They did something very bad, but I don't have a taina. Why don't I have a taina? Here we are. The source is an Evel Rabosi. Svorim Chitzonim, Mesechet Evel, and the basis of quotes Evel Rabosi. It's quoted by the Ramban and Torah Sa'odah. So the person came back to Reb Chaim and he said, well, I don't have a taina. I want to call them to the Torah. So Reb Chaim said, it's a sif mefurish in Shulchan Aruch that they did something bad. First to die should be the first to be buried. Eloshi yesh lestapek. Is this a din in Kvoida Meis? Or is it a general halacha about Kedima b'mitzvahs? If you have two mitzvahs, mitzvah number one is the number one to be performed. And the performance of the mitzvah depends on the chalois of the mitzvah. At what stage, what time were you mechuyev in mitzvah number one? So mitzvah number one, lechiyuv, is mitzvah number one, lekiyuv. So I figured, said Reb Chaim, if it's a din of Kvoida Mes, the Rambam needs to write it together with all the other halachos of Kvodas HaMes. If it's a din of Kedima b'mitzvahs, doesn't need to be written here. It's a general din in Kedima by all the mitzvahs. So I looked for the halacha Rambam. I saw nothing in Rambam, which brings me to a conclusion. It's not a din in Kvoida Mes, but rather a din in Kedima b'mitzvahs. So it's not your problem. It has nothing to do with you. It's the Chevra Kedish's problem. They have two mitzvahs. You don't have two mitzvahs. You need to take care of your father. You have nothing to do with the other. And that's why I said, they did something wrong, but you don't have a taina. So it is from this halacha b'kvuras hameis that we learn. First to die, first to be buried. So the Achronim say, the first child to arrive at Yom HaShmini is the first child to be circumcised if Yom HaShmini passed. If both children were born in the same day, but one was born in the morning and one was born in the afternoon, both were mechuyev b'milah b'Yom HaShmini b'nei tzachamo. So none of the two comes before the other. But still, the Bris of Rome says, the minig is first to be born, first to be nimoil. Even though the chalois mitzvah of both children is exactly the same moment, neitzacham of Yom HaShmini. And the Bris of Rome says, I don't know why, but that's the minig. Maybe to prevent machloikis. So we're not going to go into the details in these two tshuvas because they're complex and extremely fascinating. Both tshuvas are godless tshuvas. But if we want to go through all the sources, that'll take us a few hours. So I definitely recommend, if you really want to enjoy, learn the Bris of Rome and the Yad Eliyahu. The Yad Eliyahu is even longer than the Bris of Rome. So the Bris of Rome says, probably to be Menei Machlokes, I think it's the end of this paragraph, or the first paragraph. Could you scroll down a moment? And the Bris of Rome writes, I was Sandik. He actually was, just a moment. Yeah, okay, this is another discussion. Okay, at the end of the first paragraph, as I said, I'll call upon him boror, the imov, okay. אלה שנהגו כן להובי התחילה לבייס הכנסת, זה שלא יודע שם. אפשר שהוא מטעם, שלא יתעורר קינו ומחלוקס כנוהג avoinusenu halav. And the Gemara tells a similar story about machlokes. So, if both were born on the same day, the reason first to be born, first to have Milah, is just about machlokes. If it's the same parent, then there's no machlokes. So this reason is irrelevant. So what is the din? If one bris is a bismana and the other is shaloi bismana, both the Bris of Rome and the Yad Eliyahu both agree. Bismana would always come before Shalom Bismana. And they write 4 different reasons, which I will briefly discuss. So the Pesach Tshuva quotes these two great Gedolim. Bismana overrides the other principle, first to be born. Because whenever we have a bismana and shaloi bismana in the same day in shul, it is always the shaloi bismana was born first. That's why he's shaloi bismana. But bismana will always come earlier. Why? So I'll give you a very brief analysis. Bris bismana is more common than shaloi bismana. The problem with this argument is, whenever we find it is when we do with two different mitzvahs. It's the same mitzvah. This is Milah and that's Milah. If we're dealing with the same mitzvah, would there still be a principle of Todi Koidim? I doubt. Mekudash. Todi v'mekudash. A bigger mitzvah comes before a smaller mitzvah. Why would it be considered a bigger mitzvah Milah bismana? Because Milah bismana derech Shabbos. Milah shaloi bismana is not derech Shabbos. So that would be another reason that Milah bismana would come before Milah shaloi bismana. And the Agudah brings proof and rayas that every chumrah is relevant, trying to define what is mekudash. So one argument is todia, the other one is mekudash. Number 3, in davening, tefillah shezmana always comes before tashlumin. If you forgot shachas and you need to daven tushmenesses b'mincha, first you daven mincha and then tashlumin. The same if you forgot mincha. The same if you forgot marav. You always daven the tefillah chayva, and only then the tefillah tashlumin. So Milah bismana should come before Milah shaloi bismana. But none of them quotes a source. Is Milah shaloi bismana a gather of tashlumin? I saw in our source sheet we have the Sefer HaRokeach. So they don't quote this Rokeach, but the Sefer HaRokeach in Hilchos Sukkah writes that Milah shaloi bismana is tashlumin of Milah bismana. Could we have the Sefer HaRokeach on the screen?
Yeah. Could we put up the Rokeach? It's back there in the beginning. Not sure.
Sefer HaRokeach is one of the early Hasidei Ashkenaz. Goes back almost 900 years. And the Sefer HaRokeach deals with the question, why do we need a posuk to pater women from Milah Saben, and why wouldn't it be considered a mitzvah sasei shazman groma? Because the mitzvah is b'yom hashmini. So let's have a look at the Rokeach. Mitzvah sasei shazman groma noshim pturos. So why do we need a posuk to pater women from mitzvahs Milah? So he says, Im yavor hazman, other mitzvahs sasei shazman groma, shuvenu tashlumin, ben b'yom v'lo b'layla. Tzitzis and tefillah and einem zman ki kol shat hazmani. Ein shaykh ben tashlumin. Aval Milah shezmanu kavua b'yom hashmini, yemol, lo have a mitzvah shazman groma shalai, em lo nimor b'zmanai, kol hayomim sheyavo tashlumin yom hashmini ninu. So the Rokeach writes, shaloi b'zmanas tashlumin, and just like the davening, the tefillah shezeh zmana comes before tashlumin, would be the same by Milah. However, I am not really convinced that the Sefer HaRokeach means a gather of tashlumin. What he means to argue is that even if you missed Milah bismana, you still are mechuyev b'Milah. And that is why it would not be defined as a mitzvah sasei shazman groma. So one could question the various different svoras and arguments that Milah bismana comes before Milah shaloi bismana. And now comes the Dvar Avram. The Dvar Avram was Kovnerov. He died in ghetto Kovno. He was not murdered by the Nazis. He died a short while after the ghetto was liquidated. Meisal Metosai, and he had a proper levaya and Kvod HaMeis. I don't know whether his burial place is known or it's not known. He was one of the greatest Gedolim of his era. Shtei Bris Milah achas bezmana v'yachas sheloi bezmana eisa me'en kodemes. Hinei shana zu nimtzeis b'tshuvas Yad Eliyahu. Hevio Reb Shloime Eiger Magos l'shochan osim erei samach. It's also brought in the Piskei Tshuva. Umasik shom de Milah bezmano kodemes mishum de chaviva mitzvah b'shato. V'chein yiskem b'tshuvas Bris Avram. אבל אחר בחושס המכיל המגוינם לעני זאתי שאינו כן. זו שלא בזמן הקדמס. And now the Dvar Avram goes into a lengthy discussion. And his fundamental argument is, Milah b'zmano, the Gemara says in Psuchim Daf Daled, Kol היוםהשמיני זמנו. אלו שזריזן מקדימין למצוות. You have time all day. It's just an Indian of Zriz Magdim and Amitzvahs. However, Milah Shaloi Bismana argues the Dvar Avram, every moment you procrastinate, every moment you doicha is a bitul mitzvah saseh. Your time is up. Milah Shaloi Bismana is a chi of gomer to do Milah as soon as possible because ovar zmanoi. And therefore, to wait is an avera. Let's scroll down and see that where the punchline of the Dvar Avram is, and he quotes the Rambam. First, he discusses the Bris Avram. Okay, here we are. Lani ezdati nere de kol ze einoi, ve'ein onon askokem lekol dvoreinu letchias lo yaseyem. Ta'afilu im yehivne debila v'zmana v'motzui v'mekudash נגד מילה שלו בזמנה, אין לודן בשביל זה, דזו שבזמנו קדמס. ועד כאן לא יאמרינן תודה ומקודש קודם, אלא שבתחייס התודה לא יהיה איסור, יויסם בתחייס התודה. אבל היכש שבתחייס אין התודה ואין המקודש יהיה איסור, then you're not allowed to be over on an איסור. מה שאין כן זו דשלו בזמנו, דכיוון שהגיע לשוש יכול לומר, כל שור ושור שמעקב, over ba'asei, and he quotes the Rambam. So the Dvar Avram argues, Milah Shaloi B'zmana, every moment that you push it off is an avera. It's an avera. And he writes, he quotes the Chesed Avram. Let's look at column number 2, mamish across where we are. ויחד החיפוש מצוסי באיז השם משות חסד לאברהם, שחוסף גם כן, just like my argument. And then he says, I heard that Reb Chaim Brisker said the same. And a Chelik Beis, he has a huge argument with many other Gedolim that disagreed with his psak. And so do I, Ani HaKoton. Let's have a look at the Shach. I think it's toward the end of our package. Shach Simen Reish Samach Vav and Noide B'Yehuda. Two important sources. Let's have a look at the Shach, and then we'll examine the Noide B'Yehuda. I think it's... Okay. Kosev HaRashbatz. That's the Tashbitz, quoted by the Bris Yosef and Bedek Abayis. Because maybe we will need to be Machar Shabbos. The Makan yesh l'lemoy. Osa lo menageh b'yom chamishi, kedei shelo yov v'shlishi l'mila v'yisach l'chad Shabbos. V'chein tilik shecholo. V'nesape b'yom chamishi v'Shabbos, mamtin eloi ad l'mocho. V'ein devorov neren. So the Shach argues, it's not at all similar to Eima Fliegen Besfina. This is a mitzvah asay, the Dvar mitzvah mutar haflig, and we're dealing with a mitzvah of Milah. So the Shach and many other poskim disagree with the Tashbitz, but none of them says that it's an Aveira. If it would be an Aveira of Bitul mitzvah asay, then the Tashbitz would never say to be doicha the Milah. And the Shach and other poskim that reject the Tashbitz don't bring up this simple argument. It's an Aveira. And now we have a look at the Noida B'Yehuda Kuf Samach Vav. I think it's also in our package. And in this Shuvah in Noida B'Yehuda, we find one of the strangest manhagim we ever heard of. Mochaz. You know what this means, mochaz? It's a very common term in Chuvas. Moitzik savze. The messenger that's carrying this letter is the mochaz. Obviously, the Noida B'Yehuda didn't have WhatsApp, email, didn't even have the primitive SMS messaging. And they sent shuvas with messengers. My messenger needs to leave in the morning, so I don't have time to write a long shuva. That's why I'm answering very briefly. What a crazy idea. So there was peer pressure on parents that had a bris, and for some reason they couldn't do the bris bismanai. The child wasn't well, and the b'chorim applied pressure to do the bris at a Pesach. Obviously, there were big amalatzim, and nobody made a siyum, and the b'chorim didn't want to fast, so they came up with a spark of genius. If it's anyway Milah b'shaloi bismana, push it off to Erev Pesach, and we're going to have a big Suda, and we're going to call it Sudas of B'chorim. And all the B'chorim will come together, Sasan v'simcha liYehudim, and we're going to have a big meal. The B'chorim shouldn't have to fast. And the Noida B'Yehuda comes out against this crazy meaning. Yeda ki dov aseh masa maguna ma'oi. Lahashis ha-mitzvah filu b'yoyim ha-milah asma shekol yoyim kosher. Filu ochaz lizim akdim ha-mitzvahs. Kal v'choyim yishol nitchas miyoyim liyoyim. Afshek pa nitchas bezmano. Kol yoyim zmano hi. Yofa ansar to lomel milah shaloi bezmana b'yerev Pesach. But once again, the Noida B'Yehuda doesn't say simply, it's an Aveira. You can't do this. It's a bitul mitzvah to say. No. He says, it's not nice. It's not the right thing to do. These are my mitzvahs. And you highlighted the bottom of the tshuva. He says, Chas v'sholom, if the child will die, then you're mevatel the mitzvah. So the Noida B'Yehuda makes it clear, as long as the child is alive, you're not mevatel the mitzvah. Somebody told me, Dafka Ishneem, and I don't know, I can't verify this, but decades, many years ago, Rav Breuer in Washington Heights realized for some reason that there's an unusual amount of Milah Shaloi B'Zmana on Sundays. And when he looked into it, he became aware that if people couldn't do Milah B'Zmana, they pushed off the bris to Sunday because people don't go work to Sunday. Having a bris in any other day is somewhat inconvenient. People would just grab a bagel and run out. So they wanted to have a proper Suda, so they pushed off the Milah for Sundays. And Rav Breuer made a tekona in Washington Heights, no Milah Shaloi B'Zmana on a Sunday. No, never. And the Noida B'Yehuda is a precedent. The Noida B'Yehuda paskin the same. No Milah Shaloi B'Zmana Erev Pesach. Now, it's a crazy minhag. I can't imagine that a child that was born Chalamoid Pesach, his father would push off the bris an entire year to have the bris in Pesach. In Hebrew, there's an expression, Yesh gvul lekol ta'alul. There's a limit to every insanity. I assume the story was when a child was born somewhere around Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and you couldn't do a Milah B'Zmana, and it was just a matter of a few days or a week and a half. There was pressure, do it on Pesach. But the point I want to make, why doesn't the Shach rejecting the Tashbitz? Why doesn't the Noid Yehuda coming out against this crazy meaning simply say, Rabbi say, it's an Aveira. It cannot be done. It's a bitul mitzvah to say. So obviously, it didn't even occur to them to define this as a bitul mitzvah to say. So finally, let's go to the Rambam. Because the source of the Dvar Avram is the Rambam. And I think he's wrong regarding the Rambam. Let's go back to the Rambam. And that's the most important source in today's Shiur. Now, here we are.
Which Rambam? There's two of them. The first Rambam or the second?
And then we're going to go to Aloha Ches. First Aloha Beis.
Scroll back to the first Rambam. First Rambam.
Probably.
There was a question from the floor, Koidera.
Yes.
If you add a Milah, then you Acharit, and then you Mao. Can you retroactively fix the bittul mitzvah say that you got for the delay?
No, you can never fix, because if your Mishmini passed, you were mevatel, but you still have the mitzvah of Milah. You still Makayim mitzvah Milah, but you were mevatel the chiyuv of Biyom Mishmini Yimal B'Sar Elosai. But if you can't, you can't. If it's a sakona, it's a sakona.
But if you delayed on a day when you could have, you're mevatel, and that's some uva shelo.
Yes. So there's a fascinating tshuva in Tashbetz, another tshuva, Chelik Beis Hameches. It's not on today's Shiur, but if you ask the question, I will share this. The Tashbetz was asked the question: a person was in custody in jail, and he had a baby. And today, when a person is in jail, you still could have contact. He could make a shliach to circumcise his son. But in days of yore, there was no way to contact the person. And the Tashbetz says, it's the father's mitzvah. And the Beis Din has no chiyuv. And we would not be mild the child and Yom Shmini. We need to wait till the father comes out of custody, and it's his mitzvah, even if we need to wait a month or two. That's the psak of the Tashbetz. Because it's the father's mitzvah. And he's an oinus echemuna patay. And we have no right to take away his mitzvah, which is a fascinating truth. Let's have a look at the Rambam. This is the Rambam on which the Dvar Avram bases his chiddush. Every day is a bittul mitzvah. So before we move on to the next source, I just want to read the end of the Rambam. Aval einu yechayev kores ad shiyomes v'hu orel b'meis. Now my question is, if it's a bittul mitzvah, I say, why isn't he chayev kores? That's the argument of the Rabbit. But why isn't he chayev kores if it is a bittul mitzvah? Say, Milah is asay sheyesh b'kores. Next Rambam, same Perek Aloha Ches. Same Perek Aloha Ches. We just scroll down a few halachas. Aloha Ches. Ein mara la'olam ela b'yom achar alois hashemesh. Bein b'yom shmini shus mana, bein shalom mana, b'yom shiva halo. V'kol ha'yom kosher l'milah, v'yaf al pi ken mitzvah la'akdem b'tchilas ha'yom, she's magdim al ha'mitzvahs. And according to the Rambam refers, as we see at the beginning, l'alocha bein milah b'zmano, bein milah shaloi b'zmano. So these magdim l'mitzvahs. It's not a bitul mitzvah set. Let's go over to Perush HaMishnah Rambam, because the Dvar Avram also quotes the Perush HaMishnah. I hope it's in our package. Perush HaMishnah, the beginning of Perek Rebbe Eliezer the Milah. Here we are. ומה שצורך להזכיר כאן, שמעובר אדם ולא ימלס בנו יליד ביסוי וחומר לו ביום השמיני, הרי זה עובר המיסס גדול וחמורו, שאין בכל המיסס כמוהו, ולא ילמין תשלים על המיסס זו, אבוי חמור. But he's still מחויב, וכל זמן שלו אמורי עובר המיסס עשי, ואמורי נסתלקה מעולב ועבירה וקיים המצווה. And he says again, כשיאמר אפילו מל ביום האחרון, כי המצווה ונסתלקה מעולב ועבירה. What does he mean, נסתלקה מעולב ועבירה? מכאן ולהבא? Pshita. I mean, he's circumcised. He says it twice, regarding a father that wasn't Malbis Manoi, regarding a other that wasn't Malbis Manoi. And in both cases, he says, it's an Aveda, over al mitzvah to say. But at the end of the day, when he does Milah, he no longer has an Aveda. Pshita. You know, Reb Shlomo asked before, if I skipped Yom Shmini and I do it later, could I be metaken? Of course not. You could never be metaken and Aveda that you were over. There's no such a thing. A person ate chaylev, he ate dam, chayev koros. How could he take away that chiyuv? If the Dvar Avram maintains that it's a bitul mitzvah saseh, how could he fix that? And it is clear that the Rambam doesn't mean nestalko memenu ha'aveno mekano labo. And therefore, I think, no, it definitely is not a bitul mitzvah saseh. But the Rambam writes Mavatla mitzvah saseh. This brings us back to Hilchas Issues, which I saw on the screen a few moments ago. I think we need to, now we go over to the Rambam Perik Tezvav Hilchas Issues. And the Rambam Perik Tezvav of Issues deals with the mitzvah of Priya or Reviya. So we go back to Hilchas Issues. הוא איש מצווה פרי אבי אבל הוא איש ואמס הוא איש נסחי במססום בן 17 כיוון שעוברו לבסם שונה ולא ניסו על זה לעוברו מבט למסססי ואמו הוא עסק בתורה ותורת בו רשאי להסחר. What does the Rambam mean that מבט למסססי? What is the significance of 20 years old? Does the Rambam mean Mavatal mitzvah to say if you're not married by 20? Doesn't make sense. Or we find about the age of 20 is Agudah. Kodesh Baruch Hu Yoshev Mitzapa, 20 years past. Omer Kodesh Baruch Hu Tipach Atzmoisa. That's Agudah. Is there any room to say Bitel mitzvah to say? And if he gets married 3 days after his 20th birthday, well, what? He's not Mekayim the mitzvah. I think when the Rambam uses the words, the expression Mevatla mitzvah say, it doesn't necessarily mean what in Lumdus we define as Bitur mitzvah say. It means he has an avera of Nimna Melakayim mitzvahs say. The idea is the same. Your time is up. So everybody understands that to find a wife is not like to buy an esek. Even a firm person, the biggest machmi, goes to the Shuk Dalet Minam and decides, I'm going to spend an hour looking for an esek. The best esek he finds in an hour is the one he buys, and he's going to pay $500. To find a wife is somewhat a more complicated process. And it's also Tori B'das Achayim. So Chazal give you 2 years, 3 years. And after Tipach Atzmois of Chazal say, how much time do you need? It's about time you become serious about this mitzvah. Your time is up, buddy. It's time. So just like in Pri or Reveal, when the Rambam writes, say, it's not like it's Seisek Yehovman, you didn't take your lulav today. It's not like it's Alois Shachar and you didn't eat matzah. It's not like Yom HaShmini and you weren't Mekayim Milah Bismano. He is punishable because he is mezalzel in a mitzvah. And that is the case by Pri Arvia, and that is the case by Milah Shaloi Bismano. Which brings me to the beautiful Sharat Tzion in Siman Tov Mem Daled in Hilchos Pesach.
Maybe this is fixable retroactively, Kveder.
It is. That's exactly the point I'm making. And that's what the Rambam means. When at the end of the day, he's Mala Philip Achas Yomov, Toso Memena Aveir. He fixed it. Yes, that's exactly the point I'm making. So when the Rambam writes in Hilchas Milah, Mevatel mitzvah say, it doesn't mean that it's not fixable. It's the same as Pri Orvia when he's 20 years old. Unlike Yoim if one day passed and you didn't put on tefillin, that's an Aveda. If Leila Seder passed, you didn't eat matzah, that's an Aveda, and you can't fix that. You need to do tshuva. But if you pushed off Milah Shaloi B'zmana, that is what the Rambam means. So the Bialocha, Tov Mem Dalet, not the Bialocha, the Sha'at Zion, bottom of the page. I think it's the Sha'at Zion here. Yes. Okay. The Magen Avraham says, if you're on the way Milah Sabein and you realize that you have chometz at home, and it's la'achar zman isuroi, and you cannot be mavad l'chometz, you need to go home, burn your chometz, and then try to make it back to the Bris. And let's analyze what the Sha'at Zion is writing. This is the Mishnah Berurah. Shebemilah, אף שחיובה ביום השמיני, מכל מוקם זמן, היא כל היום, אלא שזה מקדימן. מה שאין כן הוא עושה את השביסו, מה התחלתך ולאחר הצויס, ואם כן חיובה קודם. Because the shbisu, you have a chiyuv gomer b'chitzois to burn your chometz. Milah b'zmana, you have all day. It's just a general rule of Ziz Magdiman. וגם במילה שלוי בזמנו, שחיובה בכל רגע ורגע, it is clear that the Mishnah Berurah differentiates between Milah B'zman and Milah Shaloi B'zman. Milah B'zman you have all day. Milah Shaloi B'zman, Kol Rega V'Rega you have a chiyuv. Makol Makom Lo Doma Le'aseh Tashbisu. The Mishnah Berurah understands that Tashbisu is like an Avera. Every moment that passes La'achar Chatzois, you're not allowed to have chometz. And it's not fixable. Because every moment you have chometz is an avera. Masha enkein b'milah. The le'inyan chometz t'chsivach b'yoyim harishon yalfinem and asher osa liyas chometz b'beis Yisrael machatzois yom shel Pesach ad kalosh shirisimei Pesach. Ukeshemavat liyom echad nisazu shuviyev shel atakalois hayom v'ava chasor lo yuchal imonos. Exactly as Reb Shlomo said before, it's not fixable. Masha enkein b'milah sof sof yom eloi sof. So the Mishnah Berurah clearly differentiates between Milah B'zman and Milah Shaloi B'zman. Milah B'zman, it says you have all day. Milah Shaloi B'zman, chiyuv b'kol rega v'rega. But it's still different than Tashbisu. Tashbisu is an aveda. You're not allowed to have chometz. And if you had chometz one moment, you cannot fix that. That's an aveda. By Milah, sof yom aloi soy, v'loi chiso ela mashe hisha melekayim. And that is why that's pshat in the Rambam. And I think that the Rambam is wrong. So would that bring us back to the conclusion that Milah B'zmana comes before Milah Shaloi B'zmana? I'm not sure. Because what we did see, Milah Shaloi B'zmana is chomer tfei. Milah B'zmana, if you wait, it's not a problem at all. Kol yoim hashmini zmana. Milah Shaloi B'zmana, it's not a bitul mitzvah say like the Dvar Avraham argues, but it's chomer tfei. So I'm not sure I would agree to the achronim that say Milah B'zmana comes first. I don't remember what I passed in 35 years ago. But based on the Mincha Sosha, this week's Parsha, I think I paskin Milah B'zmana comes first. Today, I would retract that psak and say, first to be born, first to be nomad. Why? Because even though I disagree with the Dvar Avraham, but we also clearly saw that Milah Shaloi B'zmana is Yoiser Chomem and Milah B'zmana. Milah B'zmana you have all day, it's just the Indian of Zriz. Milah Shaloi B'zmana is somewhat more of an aveda than Milah B'zmana. It's not a bittul mitzvah to say. as we clearly see in the Shach, in the Noide Yehuda, but it still is Chomer, Milah Bismano. And especially in the case we started the Shiur today, baby number one is a Sofek Bismano. It's not a clear Shaloi Bismano, he was born Ben Ishmoshes. So the minig, first to be born, first to have the bris, and to be doiche Milah Shaloi Bismano, b'chol ze is Chomet Fei, Milah Bismano. And after all, it's a Sofek Bismano. It's not a Vadai Shaloi Bismano. So I think today I would ask him, this is a very uncommon question. I don't ever remember being asked this side again in the last 35 years. But I think today my psak would be first to be born, first to be mal. Finally, let's have a look at a fascinating Chazon Ish at the end of Masechet Negoim, the very last Chazon Ish on Negoim. And I don't remember any other source dealing with this fundamental question. The Chazon Ish deals with some mitzvahs that are a chiyuv, but they are not confined in a certain time bracket. Most mitzvahs, say, have a specific time. Mitzvahs tefillin, mi'alois hashachar ad tzeisek rechovim. Achilas matzah mitzeisek rechovim ad alois hashachar. Milah bismana kol yom hashmini. How about taharas hanega? And that's what the Chazon Ish deals with because it's Masechet Negoim. If a person has a nega, and this mitzvah refers to nega yodim, nega begodim, nega batim, all types of negoim, you need to call a kohen or go to a kohen. And there's a process of taharas hanega. How much time do you have? How much time does one have? Do you need to do it immediately? And if you procrastinate and postpone, at what stage would you be considered a mevatel mitzvah society? And he asked the same question regarding Yibum v'chalitza. Yibum v'chalitza are a choiva. So the brother would ask, how much time do I have? Do I need to get up from a velus and rush to basin to give chalitza? He's my brother, I'm an adult. Shloishim, how much time do I have? Chazon Ish deals with the question, at what stage would a person be defined as a mevatel mitzvah? Pashtus, as long as one could be mekayim, he's not considered mevatel. And that's why the Rambam writes, Einoy chayev kores ad sheyomus v'hu orel. As long as you're alive and you still could do milah, you're not mevatel. However, the Chazon Ish brings up another possibility. And this is fascinating. Miu, third line from the bottom of the highlighted lines. Imes akav below tam, efshar de oiver ba'asei. Ve'efshar de kol shedat le'kaimo eina oiver ba'asei. And it's totally subjective. As long as you plan to do the mitzvah, you're not oiver ba'asei. The moment you decide, I'm not going to do the mitzvah, you're oiver ba'asei. So the Chazon Ish writes three possibilities. The more reasonable possibility would be, as long as I could be Makayim, I don't have an Aveda of Mevatel. Possibility number two is, the moment I decide I'm not going to be Makayim the mitzvah, you're an Aveda, it is defined as Makayim. And maybe Imesaka Verotam. Three possibilities, but the more reasonable one would be, as long as I could be Makayim, I'm not considered a Mevatel. It's not on our source sheet, but the Turei Even, Rosh Hashanah, Bava Medana, and the Turei Even is the Shagis Radia. He brings the Rambam and the Ravid regarding chorus, and he writes exactly like the second svara of the Chazon Ish. The moment a person decides, I am not going to do Milah, he is chayav chorus, and at that moment he's defined and considered as a mevatel mitzvah. But that's a chiddush. The more reasonable approach would be, as I said before, as long as one could be makayim, he is not considered a mevatel mitzvah. So I think it's a very fascinating topic and an interesting shaila and an important mitzvah.